QV, when you think about being 16, what do you see? The specific heat capacity of asphalt. It was 93 degrees that morning, and by evening the pavement was still releasing stored thermal energy into my shoes. I remember that precisely. The emotional content, I don't have reliable data on that. I was wearing canvas sneakers. The soles were thin. I could feel the temperature drop degree by degree as I walked north, into the weather system that had been building all afternoon. People want me to say I was crying, or that I was burning with rage. The body does what it does. What I can verify is that I had $20 folded into the front pocket of my jeans in a specific configuration 110, 2.5s, oriented vertically. The backpack contained 3 items: a sweatshirt, a library book that didn't belong to me, a photograph I would lose within 72 hours and never try to recover. The cello was already being discussed in another room. I could hear my father's voice through the drywall. Not the words. The frequency, the way sound behaves when the source is agitated and the receiver is stationary. I didn't say goodbye. This isn't dramatic, I simply didn't have a script for that specific interaction, so I omitted it. You use a lot of measurement. Distance, temperature, time. Is that protective? And I don't know what the alternative would be. If I said I was heartbroken, what would that communicate? The heart is a muscle. It doesn't break, it adapts to demand. I was 16. My cardiac output was probably elevated. My cortisol levels were certainly elevated. These are observations, not defenses. The storm reached me at the intersection of Maple and Industrial. I remember this because I had to make a decision. Continue north toward the commercial district, where there would be overhangs and eventually the bus station, or turn east toward the residential area where I knew one person. A girl from school who had once lent me a pen and said I could keep it. I turned east. This was not optimism. It was vector calculation. The residential streets had more trees, more surface area for wind disruption, less exposure duration. She wasn't home. I learned later she'd moved to her father's house 2 weeks prior. I sat on her porch for 4 hours, watching the rain establish new drainage patterns in the garden. When the light failed, I understood that I would not be returning to my parents' house that night. Or any night. I had $20. At 16, in that year, this represented approximately 11 hours of minimum wage labor before taxes. I did the math on the porch. The rain had slowed to a specific frequency, between 8 and 12 drops per square foot per minute. I counted to establish a baseline. You didn't try to explain. To your parents, I mean, about the cello. Explain what? The cello was broken. Someone had broken it. The narrative had already been constructed. I was the someone. My brother had been playing it that morning. I had been in the house. These were facts. The emotional valence assigned to them, my resentment, my jealousy, my destructive impulse, were hypotheses that had already been tested and confirmed by the only laboratory that mattered. I want to be clear about something. My brother was not evil. He was 15, he had broken something valuable and was afraid. The human animal, when afraid, seeks the path of least resistance. I was the path of least resistance. I was already the designated recipient of difficulty in that household. This was not conspiracy. It was convenience. When my father said, "Don't come back until you learn respect," he was not performing cruelty. He was performing conclusion. The case was closed. I was the variable that had been isolated and removed to preserve the function of the system. I walked into the storm because I had no other vector, not because I was brave, not because I was proud, because the physics of my situation allowed for no other motion. The years between. You skip them in conversation. Do I? I think I simply don't have a narrative for them. Narrative requires event. Those years were characterized by the absence of event. I was administratively invisible. No school records after 10th grade. No medical records. I paid cash at urgent care clinics, used false names. No lease, no utility bills. I slept in spaces that didn't require documentation. I worked jobs that paid under tables or didn't ask questions. I learned to be competent at things that didn't require credentials. I could repair small engines by sound. I could calculate load-bearing capacity by visual inspection. I could enter a room and identify, within 30 seconds, the person who actually made decisions versus the person who held title. These are not interesting stories, they are survival mechanics. What I will say, I never contacted my family. Not from pride, from observation. I had been removed from the system. Reinsertion attempts, in my analysis, would trigger the same removal protocol. I was correct in this. I know I was correct because, when I eventually did establish contact, through a third party, for practical reasons, the response confirmed my model. My mother asked if I needed money. This was not generosity. It was anxiety management. She needed to locate me within a category she understood: the prodigal, the fallen, the rescue able. I told her I didn't need money. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I timed it. QE, when did you become what you are now? And I don't know what I am now. If you mean professionally established, that occurred gradually and then suddenly. I had been doing consulting work, structural analysis, risk assessment, without credentials, without contracts, without visibility. I was reliable, I was invisible. These were related qualities. The transition happened when a client, an actual licensed engineer, submitted work under his name that I had performed. There was an inspection. Questions were raised. Not about me. About him. He revealed my involvement not from ethics but from fear. I was summoned. This is the correct word. I appeared before a board that had no category for my existence. I had no degree, no apprenticeship records, no professional genealogy. What I had was 17 years of documented work product, most of it performed under false names or no names at all. They made a decision. I don't fully understand their reasoning. Perhaps they were tired. Perhaps my competence was simply too expensive to ignore. They established a conditional pathway, examinations, probationary status, supervised practice. I completed these requirements not with gratitude but with efficiency. I was 41 years old. I had been doing the work since I was 19. When I received my license, I didn't celebrate. I filed it. I established an LLC. I hired an accountant who asked no personal questions. I became, administratively, a person who had always existed. Q, your brother found you. Tell me about that. A, he didn't find me. He located my firm. There's a difference. Finding implies searching. Locating implies available data. My firm has a website, a phone number, a physical address that receives mail. These are public records. He called the office. My assistant, who is trained to screen for emotional content, transferred the call because he identified himself as family. This was incorrect protocol. I have no family. I have genetic relatives. The categories are distinct. He wanted to meet. I agreed because refusal would have required explanation, and explanation would have required emotional content I didn't want to generate. We scheduled for a Thursday. I selected the location, a coffee shop near my office, public, with multiple exits, during business hours when I had legitimate reason to terminate the interaction. He arrived in a vehicle I assessed immediately late, model sedan, leased, with cosmetic damage on the front bumper that had not been repaired. The watch was a mid-tier brand, 3 years old, with visible wear on the bracelet. He checked his phone every 90 seconds. These observations took 4 seconds. I have trained myself to this speed. He looked like our father. This was not surprising, it was simply data I hadn't prepared for. Q, what did he say? A, he said you look good. This was not true. I look like what I am. A woman in her mid-30s who has not slept through the night in 2 decades. He looked like a man who had expected something else. Difficulty. Perhaps. Tears. Accusation. I said, you have something on your bumper. He didn't understand. He looked at his car through the window. He said, oh, yeah. Parking lot thing. Haven't gotten around to it. I waited. I have learned that silence generates information. People fill silence with content that reveals their operational assumptions. He filled the silence with, "I know this is weird. Me calling. After everything," I said. "You didn't call. You called my office. You made an appointment. There's a record." He looked at his phone. He put it face down on the table. He said, "Right. Professional. I get it." I didn't respond. I was calculating the thermal dynamics of the space. The air conditioning was set to 68 degrees. The window faced west. In 40 minutes, solar gain would raise the temperature near the glass by approximately 4 degrees. He had chosen the window seat. He would become uncomfortable. This was useful. He said, "I need your help. Not I want to apologize. Not I want to explain. Not I want to know what happened to you." These would have been emotional transactions. He wanted a professional transaction. This was, I understood, the only language he had left. I said, "With what?" He told me. His wife's family owned commercial property. There had been a structural event. Not collapse. Distress. The insurance company required an independent assessment. His wife's father had insisted, that they hire someone reputable. My brother had searched for structural engineers in the city. My name had appeared. He said, "I didn't know. I mean, I knew you were alive." Mom mentioned. "But I didn't know you were," he gestured. "At my clothes. At the coffee shop, at the general category of professional existence." "This," I said, "you need a structural assessment." He said yes. I said, "I can do that." You took the job. I took the contract. There's a difference. I didn't do it for closure. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because the property was genuinely interesting. The distress pattern suggested foundation settlement combined with inadequate lateral bracing. The insurance company's initial assessment was incorrect. I knew this from his description. I wanted to see the actual conditions. I charged my standard rate. I required a retainer. I established a timeline and deliverables. I sent these terms through my office manager, not personally. The contract required 3 signatures: his wife's, her father's. This last was important. The father was the actual client. My brother was merely the vector of contact. The inspection occurred on a Saturday. I brought an assistant and equipment. I did not shake my brother's hand when he met us at the property. I did not introduce my assistant by name. I performed the assessment in 4 hours. I found what I expected to find, and one additional condition that improved my negotiating position with the insurance company. I delivered the report on Tuesday. It was 37 pages, including photographs, calculations, and recommendations. I billed for 12 hours of professional time. The invoice was paid within the net 10 terms. My brother called to thank me. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 43 seconds. I have not deleted it. I have not listened to it again. It exists in my records. Did he try to talk about the past? During the inspection, or after? No. This is important to understand. He didn't avoid the topic. He simply didn't have access to it. The architecture of our interaction was professional. Professional architecture has no load-bearing capacity for personal history. We discussed concrete moisture content. We discussed crack patterns. We discussed the compressive strength of masonry units installed in 1987. At one point he said, "You're really good at this." I said, "I've been doing it for a long time." He said, "I didn't know." I said, "There was no reason you would know." This was the closest we came. The statement hung in the air. I watched him process it. He was 42 years old. He had broken a cello when he was 15. He had allowed his sister to be removed from his life. He had built a structure of knowing that had stood for 20 years. I watched him understand, in that moment, that the structure had been inspected, that I had found the cracks, that I was not going to issue a report. He said, "The insurance company, do you think they'll pay?" I said, "They'll pay. My assessment is defensible." He nodded. He looked at the foundation wall. He said, "Good. That's good." We walked the perimeter in silence. The thermal imaging camera showed heat loss patterns consistent with my analysis. I documented everything. I have those images still. They show nothing but building science. Q. Have you seen him since? No. There was one additional call, 6 weeks later. His wife's father wanted to discuss a different property. I referred them to a colleague. I explained that I had a conflict of interest. This was true. The conflict was that I had already established the parameters of our possible interaction, and expansion would have required renegotiation I wasn't willing to perform. The colleague took the job. I received a referral fee. This is standard practice. It is also a way of maintaining presence without exposure. QA. Do you think your brother understands what happened between you? I think he understands that something happened. I think he understands that I am not what he was prepared for. I think he understands that the power dynamic he assumed, rescuer and rescued, successful and fallen, guilty and aggrieved, does not obtain. But I don't think he understands the cello. I don't think he allows himself to think about the cello. The cello is foundation settlement in his personal structure. It caused distress. It was repaired or replaced or simply built around. The building still stands. He still lives in it. I don't live in that building. I never did. I was removed from it. I built something else. Cue the storm. The one you walked into. When did it end? It didn't. I'm still in it. This is not metaphor. I mean that the weather system that arrived that evening, low pressure, high humidity, unstable air mass, has never actually dissipated. It has moved, it has changed intensity, it has been joined by other systems, modified by terrain, influenced by seasonal shifts. I have learned to navigate within it. I check barometric pressure before significant decisions. I understand how wind behaves around structures. I know that storms don't end, they transition. The recording device you're using, I'm aware that this project has a purpose. That my statements will be edited, contextualized, presented to an audience with expectations. I agreed to participate because I understand documentation. I understand that archives have weight. The weather data I recorded at 16, walking north into unstable air, was not useful then. It is useful now. It establishes pattern. It proves that I was observing when observation was all I had. My brother asked for my help. I provided it. The building he needed assessed, the one with foundation distress, inadequate bracing, the insurance dispute, I stabilized it. Not personally. Through my report, through the authority of my license, my firm, my professional existence that cannot be removed by family vote. He knows this. He knows that I entered his structure, diagnosed its weakness, and provided the documentation that saved it. He knows that I did this without reference to our shared history. He knows that I could have refused, or sabotaged, or simply performed inadequately. He knows that I did none of these things. This is not forgiveness. Forgiveness would require emotion I don't have access to. This is architecture. I built something that cannot be unbuilt. I am visible now in ways that don't depend on his acknowledgement. The storm continues, but I have learned to build within it. The file is complete. I'm going to stop the recording now.